The Danville Church of God had a very humble beginning when they began meeting in the house of Reverend Arrowwood on 4th Street. Reverend Henry Robertson organized the church on July 4, 1943, with 26 charter members. Among those chartered members were Mr. and Mrs. George Moore, Mr. and Mrs. Bell and Ethel Irvin, and Mr. and Mrs. Roy and Reba Short. Property was purchased on Earl Street for $200, and a new building was soon erected. Reverend E.C. Carden pastored the young church following Reverend Henry Robertson, followed by Reverend J.T. Holman, under whose leadership the construction of the building was completed.
My first experience at the Danville Church was 73 years ago. I was 3 years old, and Mother and Dad came here to church. They were new converts, and I was struck with polio. At the time, Lucinda Luttrell was strict with polio also. And my mother and dad hadn't been saved very long, and God had been dealing with my dad to pastor, to start preaching, but he wouldn't accept his calling because my father was very uneducated. He only went to like the 3rd or 4th grade. But anyway, he wasn't educated, and he would tell the Lord, I can't preach because I don't have an education or whatever. But anyway, it was in the old part of the basement of the church, and I don't remember even who the pastor was at that time. I don't know, but it was 73 years ago because I was 3 when it happened. But on that Saturday night, my mother and dad brought me to church, and I couldn't walk. And they laid me on the altar, and the people of the church gathered around and began to pray. And God healed my body. When they took me home that night, I was still paralyzed. But the next morning, I was by their bed walking, telling them I was hungry and I wanted breakfast. God is so good. This church has had a great history in my life. As a teenager, this is where I learned that God was real. This is where I grew in the Lord. And I actually got saved at the Crab Orchard Church, but I'm 76 years old. I was 6 when I got saved. 70 years, God's been faithful. God's been faithful. I met my husband. We had our first date at this church. It was coerced by my oldest sister, Martha, but it was my first date. I got married in this church. But I can tell you, God was real in this church. His presence was real. And I think I'm where I am today because I saw that God was real in the people. Dorothy, she was my first youth leader. She took us sledding when we'd have a big snow. She did all kinds of things. Just wonderful. So I thank God for this church. I think the building's wonderful, but it's not the building. It's going to be gone one of these days. It's the God that was in this building that made the difference.
My dad was superintendent of Sunday school for this church for many, many years. I sang my first song in church at this church. I was 5 years old, I think, and my daddy asked me to come up, and I sat on his knee, and I don't know the song I sang. I'm sure it wasn't Old MacDonald, but it was something. And anyway, since that time, I have been a part of this church and these people. Brother Short baptized me, not in this baptistry. We didn't have a baptistry at this time. We went to Little Collie. I was scared of water, but I was more scared of snakes. So I was in a dilemma when I was baptized here, from this church. And it got near to my time, and I turned around and asked Bonnie if she'd go before me, and she graciously said yes. So when it became my time to be baptized, Brother Short stood with his white handkerchief in his hand, and he smiled at me, and he gently dipped me under and back up quickly. And every time I hear someone sing, "Shall we gather at the river," I remember that that experience.
My name is Janet Denham. My father was the pastor here from 1955 to 1958. That was a very young age for me. Now, when I was here, my father's family was here, they had the parsonage in the back. Now, the parsonage was not in a good shape. It had red brick siding, old time brick siding. If you run up against it, you would have scrub and knuckles would be there. And we'd play ball, and of course the boys liked to push Janet up against it. So the memories here is very, very thoughtful when you come into the building.
I don't really remember when we started coming here. I guess we still lived at the farm. But in '65, we moved Lexington Avenue close. Dad was pastoring here. And I don't remember what year it was, but he was going to pastor somewhere else, endorsed, and Dan came here. And usually we moved with Dad wherever he pastored, that's where we went. And me and the triplets all said, no, we're not moving anymore. Danville's our church. And we pretty much stayed the whole time. Been a long time. But God's good.
But another thing, when we were younger and before this was built, Jerry and Lucinda Luttrell and I, we started a quartet, or trio. And so we wanted to have money so we could get matching skirts and tops and all that stuff. So when it was down in the old, before this was built, and it had a wood floor in it, and you had to sprinkle it down with water to even sweep it because of the, the dust and everything. But they paid us $10 a week for us to clean the church and sweep it out and get it ready for church on Sunday morning so we could buy some outfits for us to go sing at the Harrodsburg at the radio station every Sunday. So there's a lot of memories here.
Okay, my name is Ronnie Short. We started coming here, and I think Dad pastored here twice, if I ain't mistaken. But we was, I think we was 8 years old, something like that. But we was the little angels. This church, we grew up here, went through a lot of different pastors, but we got saved here many, many years ago, and still true to God's word. I remember one thing, me and Donnie we wasn't too rambunctious, but we was. We had an old hedge apple tree up here on the hill. Yes. So it was me and his purpose to go up and get hedge apples and put them under people's tires before they leave. So Sunday morning you got a hedge apple under your tires. So we threw a few of them at people too, but other than that. But good memories here. Every now and then, I even drive down this way sometimes because of the memories we had here. Dad loved this church.
My name is Kathy Lewis, and my family came here, Jason Tate and Betty Tate, and I had a sister and a brother. But I was young at the time when I was here. I was around 3 years old. I talked about the church here. I've always wanted to come back in here. We would drive by here, and I was hoping one day I would come back in here to remember the legacy of this church. But I can't really tell you much because I was 3 years old. I do remember the homecomings, dinners we had. I was small, and I definitely remember the hedge apples.
And years ago, when we had revival, it was no weekend revival. They would plan 2 weeks, then it would go a month. So we were always in church. And so as teenage years approached, we would get to sit in the back of the church. And of course I was mischievous, and Dad would stop when he would stop preaching.
He said, Bonnie, you come to the front of the church, and when you get home, you know what you're going to get. I cried the rest of the service, so. And as soon as I got out of the car, I got exactly what he promised. But just being able to be with Juanita and all the people that we grew up with, and just see how the Lord has blessed their lives, and it's amazing what God can do. And I'm thankful for what God has done in my life, and I'll never forget the memories of this church.
My name's Melissa Green Folger, and I guess we started coming here when we were like 3, maybe something like that. And I just remember the fun times, I think, like the Christmas programs and the music and the Easter egg hunts and throwing the crab apples. And
I always remember visiting the shorts on is it Log Cabin Road? We used to have homemade ice cream. And one time we was there, I think Ronnie Darney and your dad Henry kind of got in trouble, and he took behind the shed one time. I remember that.
And it's been wonderful just to see the place again, because I was filled with the Holy Spirit in this place. And I tell you what, it's still just as good a day as it was then. Yes. More so, because we're getting closer to heaven every day we live. And you know, I remember the revival we had up there at the tent meeting, and how many people were saved and healed. I mean, it was unbelievable. People's coming in it went on for well over a month, I'm sure, because we were real young then, and me and Ronnie still little heathens back then. But you know, it was a tremendous time, and God had really shown what this city could be if the lifting of the Satan would pull away from this place. And under Brian's ministry and the other ministers have been at Danville Church, that is starting to lift, and you can see people hunger for the Lord in this city. And you know, and that's contributed to all the pastors that's been before us. And we've been privileged to be under their ministry. And I just thank God every day that I was raised in a Christian home.
I first knew of this church, I believe Brother Bellamy was the pastor. And I went to school with his girls, Opal and Joyce, I believe were their names, at Maple Avenue School, which is Tolliver. And we were in the 6th grade. My next trip here was, there was a tent revival going on up at the corner of 2nd and what used to be Green Street. I got, I guess, re-saved. And anyway, we immediately wanted to find us a place to go to church. And so we came here. And Ronnie and we were just talking. I asked him, do you remember how many people we came here from that revival? And he is thinking maybe 39 or something like that. I'm thinking it was a little bit more than that, but there were a lot of us that came from that revival. And anyway, I'm 87, and most of the people are gone. Most of the older people are gone. But it was a good time. It was a hard time. It was a good time, but we survived. And it just goes to show sometimes we've got to hang on with all we have and keep going, because one day it's going to be worth it all. So praise the Lord.
You can have my soul. I'll give it all. Come take control. New mercies rising, grace never failing. You're all consuming.
January 1976, the Danville Church of God, under the leadership of Reverend Raleigh Short, purchased the Southern States Boyle Co-op building on 4th Street for $48,500. And in March of the same year, the church building on Earl Street was sold to Faith Baptist Church for $25,000. During the renovation of the Southern States building, services were held in the old Presbyterian Church in downtown. The new building, located at 516 South 4th Street, was officially dedicated on Sunday, April 2nd, 1978. Under the leadership of Reverend Lonnie Doherty, the church purchased several lots on 3rd Street that were adjacent to the property on 4th Street and built the current sanctuary and enlarged the parking facilities. The new sanctuary was dedicated on April 22, 2001.
Everything, and you are my life, and you are